Welcome back, beautiful people. Thanks for joining me for another episode. I am Adam Welch, and this is the Big Fat Tripod video. Yeah, as you might have guessed it, today we're going to be talking about literally from the ground up everything that you would need to know about tripods. The good thing is that as we talk about these things, you'll see that a lot of these components, a lot of these parts and uses interchange with a lot of different tripods. So it's not going to be that in-depth of a video, but it will be built on all of my many years of mistakes and experiences when it comes to using and purchasing tripods. And hopefully it will help you out if you're in the market for a tripod, or if you're looking to upgrade or downgrade what you already have. It will help you maybe avoid some of the mistakes that I've made simply by knowing the parts and the different little nuances about quite a few different tripods. So let's get going and talk about some feet. Now, the feet of the tripod are literally the foundation, what it's really going to be resting on at the end of the day. So even though you can't be in total control over exactly how the feet work all the time, there are some points that you need to know, especially based on the type of photography that you're mainly going to be doing. The number one thing is the flotation of the feet. When we talk about flotation, that's how big the foot of the tripod actually is. The bigger the foot, generally, the more flotation you're going to have, and the more flotation you're going to have, the more stable that weight is going to be distributed on the feet of your tripod. So that means shooting in soft material like sand, mud, anything that's going to really sink in with your tripod. The more flotation you have on those feet, i.e. the bigger the feet are, the less your tripod is going to sink down into those soft materials, especially if you're using a big camera setup. Another thing to look out for when we're talking about the feet of a tripod you might be looking at getting is how they're actually shaped. Now, a lot of tripods have a lot of different shaped feet, from pointed to flat. Some of them are rubberized. Some of them are removable, so you can change out the feet depending. But if you're doing a lot of indoor stuff, especially weddings, a lot of event photography, you have to be really careful about the feet of your tripod, because some people will pitch an absolute fit if you scratch the floors at some kind of venue. Now, speaking about the scratching of the floors and that kind of thing, something you might want to take into consideration if you're especially an outdoor photographer, do a lot of landscapes, a lot of uneven or variable terrains, winter photography, especially on ice. Some tripods have little spikes on the end of the feet, and most of the time you can either remove the foot itself and it's going to reveal the spike. Sometimes you can screw the feet up onto the spikes and it exposes the end. Ever how it's done, if you think you may be running into some really bad terrain, like again, if it's ice, snow, mud, anything like that, even some rocky situations, spikes on the end of the tripod feet will really bail you out of a lot of jams. So if you think you may be running into that, you might want to be sure that your tripod has some spikes on the end of the feet. Now, moving a bit north from the feet, of course, let's talk about the legs of your tripod. Now, I'm not going to really drill down on the materials of the tripod. Namely, you have aluminum, carbon fiber, or even wood, depending on your tripod. And you're probably going to want to go one way or the other depending on your needs. If you're hiking a lot, of course, you're going to want the lightest thing you have. That means probably more carbon fiber. If you're doing studio work, get the heaviest tripod that you can. It doesn't matter what it's made out of, okay? So all that aside, the legs of your tripod are going to have some varying locking mechanisms. And there's two main kinds. There's something called a flip lock and something called a screw down lock. And taking a look at this old girl here, believe it or not, this is my first tripod ever. Walmart special. Still works. Anyway, these are flip lock legs. And seeing how this was my first ever tripod, I got used to this kind of locking mechanism for the leg. And I actually still prefer that, but then again, that's just very subjective, because the majority of my tripods now have something called the screw. The screw down legs. This is a carbon fiber tripod, the other one's aluminum. And as you can see, just as the name would suggest, screw down legs have these little screw clamps, and you want to, with any tripod you have, make sure the legs are locking really securely. There's not a lot of play, or any play at all would be ideal when you have them locked down regardless of the lock. But You will like some better than the others. Like this particular tripod, it's a great little tripod, but these leg locks have a lot of throw. That means I really have to twist them quite a ways to either tighten or loosen up these locks. The same is true with any kind of flip lock. So the only way to really get an idea of what you might like is to go somewhere where you can handle quite a few tripods just to see if you like the twist or the flip locks the best. Now some tripods come in 2-section legs, 3-section legs, 4-section legs. It really just depends on how tall the final height of the tripod is going to be and how much compact that tripod is meant to fold down to. Of course, the more leg sections you have, generally the smaller you can get it down to. This is usually how it is because it will telescope onto itself. But tripods come in all different sizes, from the incredibly small, isn't that cute, to the very, very big, taller than me kind of big. And it's going to depend on what kind of photography you're mainly going to be shooting. I use my tripods literally for everything, but then again, I don't take some of them out into the backcountry with me, and I use some in the studio more than others just for some of their inherent qualities. So the good thing is that you can get tripods that work for everything, but if you're getting really specific and depending on your budget, you'll probably want a tripod made exclusively to perform really, really well when you're hiking outdoors, and some that are made to perform in some other circumstances, like mainly shooting into the studio, to where you're not going to be moving them around quite as much. From the legs, we're going to talk about something called the center column. And it's something that's very, at least on the front end, very straightforward. A center column just allows the tripod and your camera really to slide up and down after the legs are maxed out, give you a little bit extra height, more control over what you're doing. But inherently, center columns add a little bit of wiggle room as far as potential motion. Some tripods do have center columns, some of them don't. Most of the time these days, center columns are removable in most of the tripods that I've seen coming out of some of the major manufacturers in the last couple of years. But there are some variants, and I want to talk about that real fast. Jesus. But there are some variances to center columns that really bears mentioning. Okay. This is a tripod that I tested years ago that I like so much that I just kept it. I use this for the majority of my studio work, filming, well, YouTube videos, and product shoots, and virtually everything. And apparently I can't get the leg locked down. There we go. You'll notice it looks very complicated, and this is something that you can have for quite a few tripods today. Again, that's why I wanted to talk about it a little bit. It is a 2-section center column. That means that the center column will raise up like that, but you can also extend the secondary center column, and that is very useful for one, adding height to whatever you're doing, but it will let you go horizontal, and this will enable you to get very, very, very close to your subjects for low perspective work, some macro work. This would really be great, but the main thing you really want to use it for, and what I use it for most of the time, is being able to film directly vertical or perpendicular to something like on a table. If you're doing a vlog or a product review, which I do a lot of those, that is indispensable. You will love that. So it would be one of those situations to where you might want to look at a tripod that has that exclusively for those reasons that we mentioned, because if you have to carry this around a lot, that's a lot of extra material up there, and it can get a little bulky, a little ungainly, and a little heavy. So this might not be something that you want to, again, carry around in the backcountry with you when weight really, really matters. Now, moving on to what actually holds your camera, let's talk about something that really is going to separate quite a few tripods from one another, and that is whether or not the head is something called a ball head, a fluid head, or a pan head. And that's really the three main heads that you can put on tripods. The most common and the one that you're probably going to run into the most on just like kit tripods that you can buy already put together and you don't really want to customize is something called a ball head. A ball head is just what it sounds. It's some type of usually metal housing that surrounds a little ball with a clamp on top of it. And it's going to give a lot of range of movement. Some of these go 180, almost nearly 360 if you can believe it. Well, maybe not quite 360. Anyway, a ball head will let you have free range of movement with a lot of different options as far as direction and orientation of your camera. Many of them will have a pan function to where the ball head itself, once you lock it down, will be able to pan. That's pretty good for video or following something if you're doing panning with your photography. The big thing about ball heads though, one, they can get really, really expensive depending on what they are, how much weight they hold, and their construction. Another thing about them is that if you have your camera mounted to one and you loosen up that ball head and you're not holding the camera, it's just going to go all over the place. It can be a little bit of a pain, and if you're not careful, depending on the size rig that you're using, it can tip the entire tripod over, and that's a day nobody wants to have. So ball heads, very common. They range in price dramatically. They range in size and strength dramatically. So be sure that you're getting something that fits the camera that you're using the most and the camera and lens combo that you're using the most. Depending on what I'm shooting, it could be my smaller digital camera, my big large format 4x5, my medium format. Some of those don't interchange well with different ball heads, and that's what leads me to my next point, which will bring out my first original tripod here, this little girl. It has something on it called a pan, a tilt and pan head. They call them pan video heads. Mainly they're made to do video because they supposedly, like I said, this got some age on it. They allow you to make more controlled, smooth motions, and that's especially handy when you're doing video. Pan heads work just fine for photography. Some people say you shouldn't use a video tripod for still photography. That's nonsense. You really, especially on these cheaper tripods, you can find some really cheap pan heads out there that work just fine, especially if you're starting out, or hey, some people use these all the time anyway. The only problem is with them, they get a little bulky and a little big depending on what they're used for. Now, again, studio work, not a problem, doesn't matter. Like I said, get the biggest, heaviest pan head tripod that you can get. But if you're moving around a lot, you're trying to be mobile, some of these may not be exactly ideal. That being said, I'm slowly becoming a convert to fluid heads, and that's what we're going to talk about next. And that's what this big mother right here is. Don't let it fool you though. It is actually not that heavy. It's about 14 ounces heavier than this ball head that I showed you earlier, all in. And even though it's more bulky, there's really not a lot of material there, so it's really more or less deceptive because it's not as cumbersome to use as you think it might be. Again, this is used for video mainly, and it's called a fluid head. Think of it as a pan head that we just looked at, but it has little hydraulic systems in there. And that helps you make really controlled movements. Even though it's made for video, it works great for still photography, especially if you're using really big cameras. Again, this changed my life as far as large format is concerned. With ball heads, I constantly had to have my hands on the camera, which can be a little bit of a pain when you're trying to do some of those movements on a large format camera. But the big thing is, whenever I would let go, it would run into that big problem with the camera wanting to fall over. So yeah, I have let a large format camera just go over before like that. This lets you avoid all of that because that fluid system allows you to balance out your camera. That's the screw sliding around in there, by the way, so that it doesn't fall over when you turn it loose. You just adjust the camera on this plate, it balances out, and you're just free to let it go. I really love this thing. I don't know why it took me so long to try one of these things out. Now there's a few nuances to fluid heads. Some of them are made to use in what's called a bowl tripod, and some of them are made to use on what's conventionally known as a flat base tripod. Think of like your normal center column tripods. Now, depending on the type of tripod that you're using, you'll need a few little adapters, some little things. Maybe a whole video could be made on talking about fluid heads and still photography. Let me know if you want to see that. In the meantime, the guy that really made me a convert to these fluid heads, a gentleman named Hudson Henry, incredible teacher. I'll put the video, he's got a couple of videos talking about why he went to fluid heads as well. So in the meantime, go over and check out that video. Now that we're reaching the top of our tripods, let's talk about one of the last things we're going to be discussing today, and that is the clamps and the base plates, how you actually attach your camera to your tripods where the metal meets the meat, so to speak. Now, base plates and clamps vary hugely. It's going to depend on the type of clamp it is, the type of tripod, type of head you're using, the type of clamp you're using. A lot of different companies and a lot of different manufacturers have a ton of base plates. The majority of them are going to be based on something, this is from Breakthrough Photography, called the Archetype or the Arca Swiss design. The plates have these little lips here. Those are going to clamp down inside, the base plate rather is going to clamp down inside of your clamp, and that is going to be attached to the bottom of your camera, usually with a little screw thing like that. There are some variances as far as clamps goes. You have some that are called quick release clamps, like this here. It's a spring-loaded little lever. It lets you take your camera on and off the clamp easier than having to unscrew something like this all the time. There's pros and cons to all these. Usually the smaller your camera, the smaller plate you're going to want to use. But that's not always the case. You may even be using something called an L bracket, so you can do quick vertical changes. I don't actually use one. Some people swear by them. I personally don't. So clamps are very personal. I know how weird that sounds. Some people really want that quick release possibility. Some people don't mind unscrewing the clamp. Some people want a huge clamp that have a little knob sticking up on them, doesn't allow your camera to fall off of them if you loosen it up accidentally. So yeah, just pay close attention if you're buying a tripod of the clamping mechanism to make sure it's going to do what you need, or at least what you expect. The good thing is that the majority of these, you can just switch out the clamp. You can buy them separately, and it really lets you customize your setup more than you would think. Now I know I've been rambling on for a bit about these tripods, but I will remind you again that virtually all the things that we've talked about here, no matter the manufacturer or the material of the tripod, these are the high points, and these are what you're really going to look for when you're in the market for a tripod, or like I said, just getting to know your tripod better in general. All right, guys, I know we have covered quite a bit of ground talking about tripods today. So if you have any questions, want to know anything more specific about the stuff that we've talked about, just let me know. You know where to put all that down there in the comments. I'm Adam Welch. Thanks so much for joining me here. I hope everybody's staying safe and healthy. We'll see you next time. And that is